Hello, Bulls fans. We've got a new lineup for the Olympic Spotlight Show this week. I'm Matt. I'm usual. You know me. But we're also joined now by John McWhinney instead of Dave Brand. John is the lone student writer on Bull Run. He's the only one who's currently a student at UB. And he is Bull Run's wrestling expert, and he's also starting to get some freedom from the world of engineering exams, so he's able to contribute more. And we decided to bring him on to talk UB sports on Sundays instead of Dave, and this happened with Dave's blessing. He's not sore about it at all, I promise. As a reminder, this is our Olympic Spotlight Show. We talk about all the quote-unquote non-revenue sports that I like to call Olympic sports. That means we'll not talk about football at all. And additionally, now their season has started. Men's and women's basketball also won't get anything on this show. They get plenty of coverage already from our site in other ways, and we'll maybe have video shows for them as well. So I'm joined by John, who's here. If you want to say hello, John, you're welcome to.
Hi, Bulls fans. I'm sure probably most people have already seen some of the things I've written on the site. For those of you who don't really know me, as Matt said, I'm a current student at UB, double majoring in aerospace and mechanical engineering. So it's been pretty hectic the past couple months, but I'm starting to get a little bit more free to cover some more UB stuff.
Cool. Thanks, John. Last week was a special week after the women's MAC championship, women's soccer MAC championship game, and we're back to our regular, hopefully regular. It's still relatively new, as is the show, but our hopefully regular format. So the first thing we're going to do is real quickly run through just what happened this weekend in Olympic sports for UB. It was a pretty light weekend. Many of the fall sports are over, and several of the winter sports had this weekend off, so there wasn't a whole lot happening. The big story this weekend was the women's soccer team and the volleyball team. So Thursday was volleyball's penultimate match in the MAC regular season. They came into the weekend 4-10, and pretty much needing to win their final two matches to advance in the MAC tournament. On Thursday, they held up at home against Akron, defeating the Zips in 3 sets, 25-14, 25-23, and 25-20. All-star player Talia Bishop sat out with an apparent wrist injury. She was bandaged up and didn't play at all. But freshman Skylar Day, who's steadily gotten more and more time this year, played in her spot, played nearly the entire match, led the Bulls with 13 kills, 10 digs, and 3 aces on their way to really put them in the driver's seat for that last spot in the MAC tournament. On Friday, both cross-country teams were at the Northeast Regionals in New York City. While they did have MAC championships a couple weeks ago, this was the final fall competition for them, unless if somebody had had an amazing performance that could have advanced to a national of some sort. The men finished 14th, their highest finish at this since 2011. That really backs up their season-ending finish at 11th in the Northeast Region coaches poll. The women likewise finished 19th. They at one point had gotten to 14th in the poll and fell off after a couple weeks. But 14th and 19th for the men and women of the cross-country teams. Pretty good showing for them in their last meet of the season. Also on Friday was the women's soccer team's first ever appearance in the NCAA tournament. They are, as I said a lot last week, UB's 4th ever team to make it to win the MAC. And one of those was a swimming and diving team, and one was a football team that didn't advance to any NCAA tournaments of any sort. The only other previous UB time in the national tournament was women's tennis in 2008. Who were paired up with #1 overall UCLA and got swept in their first-round match. But women's soccer went to Penn State. Penn State, number 6 in the RPI, top 10 in the country. UB got paired with them because of the way that the NCAA wants geographic accessibility. UB probably could have beaten a number of teams, I would say more than 24 teams in this tournament, but they got paired with Penn State on the road at Jeffrey Field. It was 28 degrees at kickoff, and it was not a pretty sight. They fought hard, but Penn State was just very, very fast and very, very precise, and it was clear from early on that UB was going to be under siege. They gave up a goal at the 15th minute, were able to hold on for the rest of the first half and slowly put some things together despite looking pretty frazzled. And at the end of the first half on a corner kick, Jackie Hall suffered apparent concussion. She was the MAC Defensive Player of the Year. One of the stalwarts of UB's defense, which is what was their bread and butter this year, and UB had to play the second half without her. Penn State scored 2 goals in about a minute and a half early in the second, at least one of which I think doesn't happen if Jackie's on the field. Courtney Mann slid back from the holding midfield to there, and she's normally a very smooth, very comfortable player in that role, and not just her, but everyone looked pretty frazzled. UB did get their one goal. They lost 4-1 was the final. The one goal was UB's first goal in NCAA tournament play ever. It was really great for the UB fans there, myself included, to have a chance to celebrate. Katie Roberts converted a penalty kick in we'll say the 77th minute, late in the game, to give UB a one goal, pull within 3-1. Cassidy Kidd nearly scored to make it 3-2 about a minute later, but she didn't, and Penn State got a later goal to win 4-1. All in all, hopefully still a great experience for the women's soccer team and a great year that I'm sure we'll talk about more. Finally, on Saturday, as I said, volleyball had one more match. This came against Toledo. Because they won on Akron, they were able to, if they beat Toledo, they were in, didn't have to worry about tiebreakers perhaps, but didn't have to worry about any help from the other scores. Toledo coming in this match was 1-26 on the season and 0-15 in the MAC, one of the worst teams in the country. But the Rockets played incredible, pushed the Bulls to 5 sets. Talia Bishop remained mostly hampered by injury. She played for a couple of points in 2 of the sets, pretty much sat out most of it. UB did win in 5 sets. It's the first time of 5 matches this year that they've gone into 5th sets. They've actually pulled out that 5th set. Once again, Skylar Day led the Bulls. She had 15 kills and 10 assists. Or 14 digs, excuse me, not assists, 14 digs. So Skylar Day led the Bulls. They advanced to the MAC tournament. We'll be talking more about volleyball in a second. But first, I've been talking for a bit. That's the weekend rundown. In our format, we try to highlight 2 teams a week. And the first one we want to highlight is wrestling. Even though they didn't compete this week, they're off to a really strong start. As I said, John is our wrestling. He's the guy who knows wrestling among Bull Run. It is probably of all the sports that UB has my weakest, the one I know the least about, and the one I have to learn the most about. So it's really nice to have John around and having more free time and able to talk more. So, John, take as much time as you want, 8 to 10 minutes or so, and talk about wrestling and fill us up on what's going on so far.
All right. Well, really the first place we need to start is before the season, and we need to talk about John Stutzman's recruiting class, which was, coming off of a 3-win season, only advanced 1 wrestler to the NCAA tournament. The fact that he was able to pull in 19 wrestlers that combined for 58 state tournament appearances and 4 state championships, and we ranked in the top 20 in the country. It was really impressive, and a lot of those guys they've really impressed early too. They've been able to crack the starting lineup, and they've performed. And over the first 2 weeks, the team really came out on fire, winning 3 of their first 4 dual meets, which matched their total from last year. They beat Campbell 46-6, which Campbell's a rebuilding program. They had several weight classes that they couldn't fill, so we collected forfeits. But the guys that did wrestle, they completely dominated their opponents, which you really always like to see. Then at the Appalachian State duels the following day, they had 3 dual meets. They came out swinging early. They took down Cumberland 50-0, which when you completely shut down an opponent like that in Division I wrestling, that's very impressive. Then they lost to Gardner Webb 32-7, and then they faced Appalachian State in the following match, and I was really interested to see as to how short of a memory that the team had, and if they would forget about losing the prior match, then come out and really wrestle hard. And they ended up beating Appalachian State 20-18. Which, in wrestling world, Appalachian State is a very solid program. They've always had really good teams about the past decade and a half. And they've consistently sent wrestlers to the NCAA tournament, and they've had guys ranked in the they do the top 35. The NCAA does it. The rankings really depend on which website you look at. But the highlight of that was senior Max Soria, 125 pounds. He defeated the number 29 wrestler in his weight class. And he was really the catalyst behind the UB victory. And speaking of him, he's currently 7-0 on the season. He's the number 29 wrestler in the country now. And then at the Oklahoma Brockport tournament this past weekend, he claimed the championship at 125 pounds. And he started off, his first 3 matches were 3 successive pins that were faster each successive time. And he beat 2 wrestlers from Oklahoma and 2 from Lock Haven, which both are traditionally very, very good wrestling schools. And other guys really to highlight is freshman. He's currently on the season, and he was tournament, and he was 3-0 at the Appalachian State Duels, which he recorded a pinfall and 2 major decision victories, which is a victory by over points. And he's actually a Western New York native. He's a true freshman from West Seneca East. Redshirt freshman Joe Ariel was 5-3 on the season so far. He was 4th at the Oklahoma Gold Tournament, and his only losses were to a former Big 12 place finisher, Brad Johnson from Oklahoma. I believe he is ranked in the top 20 in his weight class at 197 pounds. And then Alex Smythe, he's only 4-5 on the season, but he's wrestled the most ranked wrestlers out of any of the UB wrestlers so far. And he had to face Justin DeAngelis of Oklahoma in the semifinals at the Brockport Oklahoma Invitational. And DeAngelis was a former Big 12 runner-up, and he's gone very far in the NCAA tournament before. And 157 is traditionally one of the toughest weight classes in the NCAA, and Smythe is also a Western New York native. I've really been impressed with the way John Stutzman has turned around from last year. He went from Bloomsburg, where wrestling was the only Division I sport, and he had to fundraise a ton of money. And now he comes to UB, a big-time school, comparably to Bloomsburg, and he's really starting to put the program on the map. He's done an excellent job recruiting so far, and the young guys are doing a really good job. And the MAC is, I'd argue, it's the second toughest conference in the NCAA for wrestling, behind the Big Ten, which houses Penn State, being they've won 3 straight national championships. Minnesota, they've been the national runner-ups to Penn State. Then you got Nebraska and all the traditional wrestling powerhouses. So I'm really interested to see how the team does once we get into MAC play. That covers it.
Cool. I got a question for you, John, and I've done a little bit of research on this, and I know that you can fill me in more. And I'm certain that there are more people that have questions about this. When you say in a dual meet that UB wins 36-20 or 20-18 or something like that, I know that those points come from winning in different ways, and you get different amounts of points if it comes by a pin or just having more points at the end. Could you run through the different ways that someone can earn points towards a dual score within their own little one-on-one face-off?
All right. So there's really four types of ways you can win a match. By pinfall, which is obviously pinning your opponent's shoulders down to the mat, which is 6 points for your team. A technical fall, which means you are winning by 15 or more points at any given time in your own match, and you score points in your match by executing takedowns, escape moves, getting near fall points, and so on and so forth. And if you're winning by 15 or more points, then the ref will call the match and you win by a technical fall. And that counts for 6 points as well, same as a pinfall. Then a major decision is when you win by 8 or more points, but you don't reach the 15-point threshold. And that is 4 points, if I remember correctly. And a decision is less than 8 points, and it's 3 points, 3 T points.
Cool, thank you. Did you want to talk about Muhammad McBride right now, or did you want to save him for later?
I think we could talk about him right now. You and Dave hit on his story a little bit last week, and for those who weren't around last week and don't know much about him, Muhammad McBride is a senior. He transferred to UB last year from Erie Community College. And if his name wasn't really much of an indication, he practices Islam, and for his faith he has a beard. And in the NCAA, there's a rule that you can't have any facial hair beyond a well-trimmed mustache, so it can only come down to like the top of your lip. It can't go down any further than that. Excuse me. So there was a big fight between UB and the NCAA.
Oh no, we've lost him. Well,
Oh,
you're back now. Keep going. Great.
okay. That's a school internet.
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, so where was I?
Big fight between UB
Right.
and the NCAA.
Yeah, so there's a big fight between UB and the NCAA to get a waiver for him, so he could still wrestle with the beard and still participate. And for the majority of the season last year, his first season at UB, he didn't wrestle, because I mean I would have done the same thing. You know, it's his faith comes first, and I 100% agree with what he did. I don't agree with the NCAA rule, because internationally you can have beards and you can have facial hair. They say it's a safety thing. I mean, I wrestled for eight years, and I never really had a problem with that. They say the same thing about long hair, because opponents, you know, they can grab a hold of it and pull it. It can be dangerous, but in any of the freestyle Greco-Roman tournaments that I went to that people did have beards, I never once saw anyone get hurt or have their beards get pulled. So it was a real big win for him to get the waiver, and it was really at the end of last season that he started to wrestle, and he actually did really well, and then he got back on the mat at the Oklahoma Brockport Invitational. He lost both matches, but it's really nice to see him to get back on the mat and participate, especially that he's a senior and it's his last year.
Cool. Thanks a lot. The other team we want to highlight this week is volleyball. As I said at the top of the show, they won both their matches this weekend, happily against the two weakest teams in the MAC to get to 6-10, which was good enough for the 8th spot in the MAC tournament. It is the first time that UB has secured a spot in the top 8 of the MAC tournament. I mistakenly on Twitter this week have been saying that it would be the third time they've advanced into the MAC tournament. That's incorrect, because until 2011, before that, all the teams in the MAC advanced to the tournament. But what there was a pre-quarterfinal round prior to whittle the tournament down to 8. And so in 2009 and 2010, UB had beaten Akron and Kent respectively in that first round to advance to the quarterfinals. But this is the first time that UB's finished in the top 8. It is not the first time they've advanced the tournament, because before 2010, all the teams, when there was Marshall and there were 13, or when there was just 12, advanced, and they made it work from that. So even when UB was 1-15, they at least went and played. So I was a little bit mistaken on Twitter, but this is the first time they've been in the top 8 in the regular season. 6-10, like I said, matches last year's win total of 6-10. Last year they were also tied for 8th. This year I believe they have 8th outright. They didn't have to deal with any tiebreaker with Central Michigan. But if they had the tiebreaker over the Chippewas anyway. Last year they were 6-10 in a 3-way tie for 8th and lost out on it on tiebreakers. But before last year, UB had never won six matches in a season in the MAC season. So we're kind of on a high right now. We are with a new coach, Reed Sunahara, and there's a question of how much has he changed the program and this and that. Todd Kress was the old coach, one of a number of coaches that Danny White has gotten a lot of publicity for firing. We learned this last year when Todd Kress was fired. A lot of heated allegations came out on our site and around the internet, really, on Twitter and on volleyball forums that I went digging on. There's a question that the Todd Kress firing was not entirely performance-based, but there were some ethical issues going on. I can't verify any of that. It's just what people are kind of hinting at and what might have happened at previous stops around Todd Kress's coaching style. What we do know now is that Reed Sunahara is the coach. He's a coach like many of Danny White's hires with upper-class elite pedigree, both as a player and as a coach. His most recent stop before us was with the national team program and in the collegiate ranks with Cincinnati. And he's led UB this year to 6-10 into the MAC tournament, even though they lost 7 of 8 MAC matches in the middle of the season. They did this while missing Talia Bishop for nearly half of the season, nearly a third, we'll say, of the season, including the Akron match and the majority of this most recent Toledo match. They did this after graduating Kelly Swoboda last year, who was the MAC Defensive Player of the Year, who is frequently good for 20-plus digs a night. So they advanced. Like I said at the top, they beat Akron in 3 sets and beat Toledo in 5, which was a bit of a surprise because Toledo has been very weak this season. Toledo had an outside hitter hit over 600 for the match, which hitting percentage is very similar to batting average in baseball. Over 600 is incredible. 300 is quite good. UB as the season average is around 210, but UB was able to overcome that. Really of note this season for UB is that about halfway through the MAC schedule, Sunahara switched from using just one setter and leaving her in for the whole rotation. And when she was in the front line, just, okay, the setter's going to have to deal and help block, to switching halfway through the MAC season to a 2-setter switch-up where the setter is always on the back line, and when the rotation forces her to the front, he switches her out for a blocker and switches the blocker that's rotating to the back line out for the new setter, and running 6 blockers in rotation and 2 setters versus 5 blockers and 1 setter. And did UB play much, much better because of that? I'm not really sure. They continue to lose a couple games after that switch, but especially in the last 3 or 4 matches, I thought UB played better. They've also seen this season a lot of strength from the middle versus from the outside. Talia Bishop is an all-MAC performer at outside hitter, but she's missed some time due to injury. There have been times where other teams have been able to focus on her, and the other side of the attack hasn't really been able to pick up. Megan Lipsky is usually real regular and able to get consistent points, and sometimes she's just been shut down. But the middle of the front line has been very strong for UB this season. Akila Lane and Amber Hatchett are both juniors who usually start at middle blocker and are very strong. They both have had very strong days in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Freshman Cassie Shadow is also middle blocker. She has really stepped up late in the season, put up some really big numbers. I believe she leads the team in blocks per set, and she might lead the team in hitting percentage as well. Similarly, there are a number of freshmen on the team. I mentioned at the top, Skylar Day from the outside has really picked it up after getting more and more time this season. And Nikki Balzanowski, the libero, which is a defensive specialist she's a freshman. She's played very well at libero all season long, except for 2 or 3 sets in one match when Megan Lipsky took it, and that experiment didn't really work out too well. One of UB's setters, Megan Lynn, is also a freshman. Their serving specialist, Tessa Oyama, is a freshman. There's a number of freshmen who are stepping in and contributing, as well as a number of upperclassmen who are fitting in and have led UB to, by wins and losses, maybe not their best season in a good time, but considering the departure of Kelly Swoboda, and considering that last year they missed out on the tiebreaker and kind of the overhaul of things that happened, that we don't really know exactly what's up, but we know that it was more than just on-court performance, led to Reed Sunahara coming in. It's been a strong season given the historical context that UB finds itself in. I think 4 of UB's first 5 seasons in the MAC, they went winless. They have a number of seasons with only 1 win. And I believe in the last 6 seasons, it's counting backwards, 6 this year, 6 last year, 5 the year before that, 4, 5, and a 3. It's when 6-10 is your best ever showing in the MAC, it's something to celebrate right now anyway. And it is the first time that UB has finished in the top 8 of the MAC in the regular season. And really, they could have had 2 or 3 more games if not for some injuries or some tough play in the middle of the MAC slate. They will, in the MAC tournament, face off with Western Michigan, the number 5 seed, on Friday. The MAC tournament is not a straight 8-team bracket with quarterfinals to semifinals to the final. What they've done is much like the MAC basketball bracket does. They protect their top seeds, and so it looks like a very elongated. In each round of the bracket, there's only 2 games being played. So UB is the 8 seed playing the 5 seed, and the 6 and 7 seed are matching up. That's Kent State and EMU. The winners of those 2 games will face the 3 and 4 seeds who get a bye into the second round, and then the number 1 and 2 seeds, Ohio and Northern Illinois, get a bye right into the semifinals. And Ohio and Northern Illinois are far and above the best teams in the MAC. They were combined 30-2 this year, and one of those losses was Northern Illinois in the last day of the season. So that's the MAC tournament. That starts Friday. That's being hosted by Ohio and Athens. UB against Western Michigan, I believe we lost to them in our one showdown with them earlier in the season, but if UB puts a good game together, they could do it. It's nice that they're not facing the number 1 seed Ohio as they would in a true bracket situation if it were just a straight 8-team lineup. So that's volleyball. They had a real strong weekend after some rough times. We're able, maybe not thanks to a tiebreaker, but we're able to capitalize on a weak closing schedule while Bowling Green and Central Michigan had a tough closing schedule to get into that 8 spot. They matched last season's performance, and they're in the MAC tournament, which is better than they did last year and better than historically they've done. So context considering, it's a strong year for UB volleyball. So that's that. And that's wrestling and volleyball. Those are our 2 kind of spotlight sports today. And we've been going for about a half an hour. So half an hour to go. We're trying to move this into more of a banter-style discussion time. In the past, Dave has just kind of asked me questions. Hopefully John and I are able to have a bit more conversation. We'll see what happens. It's our first run through here with the 2 of us. John, what do you want to talk about? Anything you want to say? We'll just get this going and see what happens.
I think piggybacking off of how you were talking about the Todd Kress firing and Reed Sunahara coming in, I guess we could really talk about the Danny White Olympic hires and how have they really fared so far. I know I hit on Coach Stutzman, how he's really turned around the wrestling program really fast they were just abysmal a few years ago, and Coach Jim Biegner's final year. And last year it was really a really tough transition because the coaching styles between Biegner and Stutzman were so different. Stutzman stresses more. He's not really a technically oriented coach. He wants his wrestlers to perfect 3 moves and go out and have maximum effort all the time. But he's really turned around recruiting. He's actually got a top 15 wrestler nationally. He just signed on National Signing Day. And in my opinion, I'm probably biased because I'm so into wrestling, but I really think that UB wrestling is going to be the premier sport here at UB because the MAC is such a strong conference and because we can get people to the national tournament every year. We haven't had an All-American, which is placing in the top 8 at the national tournament since I believe the 05 or 06 season when Kyle Sermonar did it. He placed 8th. I believe it was at 197 pounds, which that's a huge accomplishment. And I really think in his recruiting class that came in this year that there's a few guys that could do that.
Cool. You're a wrestling guy, so you know. You mentioned both earlier in this show and when we were sitting at the volleyball match together last weekend, or at the beginning of this weekend. You travel to Penn State and back in 24 hours, and the weekend gets really long. You mentioned that Stutzman had to fundraise a lot at Bloomsburg just to keep the program going, and I won't hand it back to you to explain that because that's, I think, all we need to say about it, but that says something about his drive, and he was able to build a national contender at Bloomsburg while doing that. That's not an issue here at UB. As much as anybody wants to complain about this or that, UB's in a position where he doesn't have to fundraise to keep his team alive.
He actually...
Go ahead.
Yeah, he actually, comparatively, he has so many more resources. It's really the difference between, I guess a good analogy would be between a bow and arrow and a fully automatic machine gun is what he has here. I mean, he can really go out. He has the resources to go cross-country and recruit the best guys out there, and he has a very good sales pitch because he turned Bloomsburg from really small school. They were teetering on the edge between being D1, not being D1. He went in. They had to fundraise over $100,000 each year. And he really turned the program into something really successful. I've personally seen him coach at Bloomsburg. I've been to a few college matches while I was in high school. And he's a really intense guy, coaching on the mat, but as soon as he's off coaching, he's always talking with his wrestlers. He's just really a player's coach. And I think that's why so many people are drawn into him, and that's why he's starting to get so many recruits in.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, John. That's you just keep talking about wrestling, and I'm glad that we've got you, because all I could really do is recap things. You talked about I do want to talk more about this, the Olympic coaches and things, and I think that for a lot of people, football is what matters, and that's where Danny White's referendum will be. And I understand that football drives the traffic, drives the money, drives the attention, but I think that it's foolish to use news of Danny White firing a bunch of people in other sports as a sign of this young, brash, arrogant athletic director. And I'll admit, I'm a Danny White fan, and nobody's really going to change my mind on that, and that does make me biased. But people will point to all these firings and say, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, he's shaking up the status quo, what the heck, and then only look at football as a referendum on success. And I will have a piece on this week. I've kind of been teasing it for a while. But everywhere that Danny White's made a change has improved. Softball made it to the MAC final last year, and nobody noticed because basketball was out of season and football was out of season. They went to the MAC final, lost to Ohio, who had Savannah Joe Dorsey, without a doubt the best pitcher in the MAC, threw 2 no-hitters in the MAC tournament. That's only the first. But we've talked about wrestling, we've talked about volleyball. Women's soccer obviously went to the NCAA tournament, their first season under Sean Burke, his first season ever coaching as head coach of a college team. He was on the staff, on Michael Thomas's staff, and was able to keep his job at UB and even get the championship out of it in his first season. They were undefeated at home. You can't ask for anything more, I don't think, from a team. I'm trying to think of who else had turnover. The men's tennis team made the MAC championship in the spring. I believe Coach Nickel has been around for longer than that. Men's soccer, there's a debate of how well poised they are to really succeed in the MAC because other teams are similarly young. But if you watch men's soccer from the beginning of this year to the end of this year, you see that Stu Riddle, who is only in his second season, is really building something strong. Russell Cicerone was named this past weekend the first team All-MAC for the second consecutive year. He's only a sophomore, and he's the first Bull to do that since 1999 when Tim Butcher was named first team All-MAC in his junior and senior year. Tim Butcher in 1999 is also the last Bull to score more goals in a season than Russell Cicerone's 10 in this year. So that's a 15-year gap. That's what the men's soccer team is doing. They've made it to the MAC tournament before this year, but for many, many years they were finishing last in the MAC year after year. And I discovered a lot of this when looking through the record books surrounding to look at data for the women's soccer team. But what you've got is you've really got, people don't see it much beyond football, but UB was non-competitive in almost every sport for the better part of the 2000s. So almost every sport is setting program highs or program bests in the last 2 years, and all people want to focus on is the firings. And John, I know there's other coaches that I've left out that I'm not going to pause and say to think about right now, but I'm sure you've got something to say on this too. I know that you're in favor of the New York Bulls initiative. You wrote a really good piece on it about a while ago, but it got some pretty favorable reviews, just laying out what it actually is, because there's a lot of misconceptions around. I don't know if you have anything to add or not, but that's my thoughts on the Olympic coaches.
Yeah, I mean, I really do agree with you on most everything that you said. Yeah, it's really, especially because a lot of the big news sources, they only touch on the Olympic sports when it's kind of convenient, like with women's soccer. I mean, that was the first I saw of them on the news when I would watch it at night or reading in the Buffalo News or something like that, was when they had actually won the MAC tournament. And it was a team, that otherwise you wouldn't have heard about them. And it's the same thing with any of the other teams that have done so well. And even men's soccer made it onto the Sports Center top 10 with Russell Cicerone's double overtime half field goal, 50-yard goal. And there's been a lot of positives, and no one's really noticing it. It's a real shame because what Danny White has set out to do, it's working. And people just look at football and like, oh well, football team's not doing good, and you extended Jeff Quinn, but you fired everyone else, and he's this brash, arrogant guy. Which if you just go up and talk to the man for 5 minutes, you'll realize that he really does care about the school, and he wants every single sport here to succeed, not just football, not just men's basketball. He wants everything, and it's really the old saying that rising tides raise all boats, and it's the same thing with Olympic sports team, that UB needs to build that as a solid foundation, so the basketballs, the footballs, the revenue sports can really be elevated, to that level. I mean, if you look around at any of the Power 5 schools, their Olympic sports are on par or better than their revenue sports are. And that's really the model that I think he was going after, that you need to build every single sport and be able to be competitive in those sports. And that's, I don't know, it's just tough because so many people don't really know about it, and the only coverage that they get are from football and basketball, unless obviously they read on Bull Run. But I think he's done a very good job so far, and especially being a student on campus, the attitude among the student body has seen a massive shift. I mean, even being at the MAC championship game, I was hidden over in the student section. I forgot to come find you, but I've been to a few soccer games before, and no one was there, no one really cared. But now, the teams are getting better, and students are starting to come out. And I mean, if you can get out, I forgot what the exact number was. Was it about 600 or 700 people or more that were at that game?
Yeah, the official number was 498, but there's no way it was under 500. And I've seen how much work they have to do during the game to keep things going. So I wouldn't be surprised if they stopped counting at kick. And as you'd expect at noon on a Sunday on a college campus, a number of people came in after noon. I would estimate in the low 600s. That was a great game to be at, and people showed up for the Ball State game the Friday before in the semifinals, showed up for the game that clinched the MAC regular season championship, and people hear about these sports and they get excited. And my gripe is not so much that everyone should pay attention to every sport. I understand that some people just don't care about soccer or just don't care about women's sports, and I disagree that you should or shouldn't. But my gripe is when people will use the firings or use program-wide, athletics-wide things as a sign of to bolster their case against something, but then not acknowledge the positives there and only look to the revenue sports. Those are the only things that can redeem the athletic department. And I think your point about most schools are better in Olympic sports than they are in football and basketball, just because there's so many, only so many teams can be top 50 in any one sport. I think that's a really good point, is that we need to get it all. And really, unless you have more to say, the last thing I want to say on this is between our expanding coverage of the Olympic sports and just there being more success in them, at Bull Run I'm hearing from a lot more alumni of athletics. I'm interacting with a lot more parents and families of current students. I'm hearing from a lot more different sources. And those people, the alumni, the families, the current students, everything I can tell, they love the changes that are happening in the department. You look at all the coaches and how they interact with each other on Twitter, there's more interdepartmental love than there has been before. There are coaches like tennis assistant coach Miranda Stan on the women's side, head coach Nails Nickel on the men's side, Felicia Legette-Jack in men's basketball, Stu Riddle to an extent, Sean Burke for sure, Reed Sunahara. There are coaches at UB who are constantly plugging the other teams and giving congratulations on Twitter and sending good luck wishes. Coach Brace of the rowing team is another one who's real active. the people who are affected most by all the changes in athletics and this increased standards is really what I'll call it, have overwhelmingly positive reactions to it, and I think that's very significant. I think no one knows it better than the people that deal with it every day. And I that's the last thing I have to say. If you have more, that's great, but I'm going to end there.
Yeah, I mean, right before the MAC tournament last year, the MAC wrestling tournament, I had written a preview and then the recaps for that and the previews before the NCAA tournament because Nick Flannery was the only wrestler to advance, and his mother actually reached out to me on Twitter, like thanking me for what I had done to cover it, because there was nothing really else beyond the UB athletics recaps of like what had gone on and everything. And it's just really nice to see like that the community is even though all the sports are kind of niche sports right now, I think once the community like really starts more getting involved, I think you're going to see there's going to be a large pickup in the amount of people that are coming out to the Olympic sports games, especially with women's soccer winning the MAC championship, and I believe they're returning a good number of their starters, right?
Yeah, they'll return 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They'll return 7 of 11 starters, but they have the presumed starter. I can think of 2 people who will probably be starters next year who saw significant time as subs this year. I would expect 8 or 9 of the starters next year to have gotten upwards of 20 or 30 minutes a game this year, with 7 of them having been starters this year. So we'll see. They've got 2 big holes on the defense that I think. I have one supposition of how he'll fill it, and there's another way that he could do it, and that'll change some things. Whether he moves Angel Hart into the middle or moves her up into the holding midfield role. But their defense is the back line has 3 or 4 returning. Selena Carrero is returning up front. Cassie Kidd and Julia Benatti are returning on the wings. Andrea Kniper, who got a lot of time and found some scoring touch in the MAC tournament, is back. People are going to recognize names and know faces that they saw in this run next year. It's not a wholesale overhaul.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I believe Laura Dougal as well. She's I had done a little bit of reading on her, and apparently she's a pretty big deal in Canada. And I think that's one area that I've noticed about women's soccer, especially, has been really active in trying to recruit from Canada. I think we have a very big advantage over any other school in terms of trying to recruit from Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, right now this year in the MAC or in the NCAA tournament, there was only 1 school of the 64 that had more Canadians than us. We have 4. This year's team, it was Sophie Therian, who's a senior, and then Laura Dougal, a freshman, Julia Benatti, a freshman, Cassie Kidd, who all year I've been saying she's a sophomore. She's actually a junior. I apologize for that. But UB has a number of recruits coming in next year who are also Canadian for women's soccer. Now, soccer didn't do signing day this past week. Soccer's comes later in the year at the same time as football and men's water polo, but we don't have one of those teams. But I've been able to dig up a couple of soccer recruits, and the ones I can find are all Canadian. I found 3 for next year. One whose name I didn't write any of their names down for this, but one whose name I don't know. I know that she's from close southern Ontario. Her first name's Rebecca. I don't know her name. She was at the MAC championship game. I know that. She's a forward that will hopefully come in and help Alex Lambert, who was a freshman who played a lot this year. Selena Carrero, sophomore, led the MAC in assists. Jess Marlowe, who didn't play at all this year but was a highly acclaimed striker out of Rochester area. So we will have a lot of young forwards, and this Rebecca recruit will also help. We've also got 2 more that I dug up. One from Sault Ste. Marie, and another from I think the Toronto area. I posted them both links on Twitter about 3 hours ago. If it was critical, I could dig it up, but it's not. But we're going to continue to have more Canadians on the team, and you're right. That's a really big advantage that UB has in all sports. Really, we are the closest NCAA school to Toronto, which is the largest city in Canada and the richest city in Canada. There's a lot of solid club sports pushing things out there. Since we're on recruiting and we're on Canada, volleyball, I did mention this earlier. They said goodbye to 2 seniors this past weekend. We've still got some time to play, but we had senior night. Sable Stoller, who missed 2 seasons due to injury and has been playing well this senior year, will graduate. And Liz Scott, who has missed this entire year and the bulk of last year due to injury, is also graduating. And on recruiting, I know of one who signed. Her name is Gabriella Natsigowski. She's also from Southern Ontario. She and her club team have competed in a number of provincial championships. And then I also found news of a verbal commit from someone named Hannah Watson, who is supposedly the first ever volleyball player from her school to get a D1 scholarship. That's what I want. She's from Canton, Ohio, but I can't find any news of her actually signing. I know that UB's only filled 1 spot of the 2 leaving, and she was verbally committed for this year, so I'm not sure what's up there. I'm trying to think if there's any other Canadian recruits. Well, the softball has a Canadian recruit, Courtney Gilbert, also competed provincially for her club team there. And I could go through more recruits, but I don't want to talk nonstop for a bit. John, do you have anything? I know you mentioned a wrestling recruit earlier.
Yeah, his name's Tommy Forte. He's a senior from Mishawaka. I probably butchered that. I think we're living in upstate New York my whole life. I'd be better at pronouncing those types of names. But he's from Indiana. He's a top 15 recruit nationally, depending on which site you look at. He's either ranked 15th or 18th. He's the #1 recruit out of the state of Indiana, which is really impressive. His freshman year, he placed 3rd in Indiana. His sophomore year, he won a state championship, and this past year, he was state runner-up. And right now, at this point in the year, wrestling season is just kind of getting started in high school, so he'll be really fun to watch to see how he does his senior year of high school, because if he completely blows through the competition and is able to win another state title, then we'll have a really, really solid guy to fill the middle of the lineup out. And really, the depth we already have is really impressive. We're 2 to 3 guys deep at each weight class, which is very impressive. And a lot of the guys are young, and once they start getting seasoned, the next 2 to 3 years, and they're all going to start talk. They're all going to start competing for MAC championships, and they're all going to start advancing on the NCAA tournament. Another thing is the APR ban this year. Obviously, we didn't really touch on that, which it really stinks because it was nothing of Stutzman's doing, nothing of the current regime's doing. It was the final 4 years under Coach Jim Buechner really started when Desi Green was dismissed from the team, and there was a whole slew of troubles. We don't really get into those, but it really stinks because Max Soria has come out. He battled injury most of last season, and he wasn't at his best at the end. And this season, he's come out on fire, and he's looked like he could really compete for a MAC championship. And it's just a shame that he's not going to be able to go to the MAC tournament.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the news on that one recruit. We did not talk about the APR ban for wrestling, but I think Bull Run, we covered it pretty in depth for the level of coverage we had at the time when the news broke. It's another sign of how, I understand people being upset with firings, and I understand that there's been a lot of change, but there was a piece in the Buffalo News a week or so ago that we have talked about on this show and we've talked about on the site that was ostensibly about the former wrestling coach and his new career in NASCAR, but was really just a chance, in my mind, to take shots at the change in Danny White's decision. And something that was completely glossed over was the several years of losing records and the fact that the wrestling team is not allowed to compete in the postseason this year because of academic issues that happened under the old coach. So I'm glad we touched on that a little bit more. Definitely a bummer for Soria, but he does have another year after this. Since we're on recruits, I'll just run down the rest of the recruits from what else has come out. National Signing Week, National Signing Day. It's not a single day, but that's what you call it. The Fall Early Signing Period, which is a chance for athletes from all sports other than football, both soccer and men's water polo, extends till the 19th, so we may still have news coming in. I think I've averaged finding 1 or 2 new recruits a day since the initial rush. We know of full classes for men's and women's basketball. We won't talk about them. We know of full class for track and field, which signed 3 women. Where are they? Jill Decker, who is middle distance from somewhere in New York. I've forgotten that now. They're calling her middle distance, but it looks like she's also run 200 and sprints in the relays before. But her top 400 time is in the low 57s, and her top 800 time is a good bit faster than mine ever was in the low 2s. In addition, they signed 2 distance runners, Brittany Fuller, who is from, I believe, Port Jervis, New York, and Sharday Henry, who's from Ontario, another Canadian recruit, as we talk about that. She's not related to UB track star Asia Henry, but she is the fastest distance runner ever for UB to sign. Her 1,500 times, which is the women's equivalent of the mile, it's a little shorter, and her 3,000 time, which is equivalent of the 2 mile, are both the fastest times that a UB recruit's ever had prior to coming to UB. So that's very exciting. Presumably she hasn't peaked, running being a non-contact sport. You can expect her to be about that fast, and not fall off. Even if she doesn't improve, that's still very fast. In other sports, I referenced a softball recruit from Ontario. I haven't researched the softball class, but it is very large and it's very diverse. Just like Bobby Hurley set himself up in a good position with a winning first season and then able to quickly retool and have a big class that's all his own, softball is doing something very similar. Trina Peel was able to make a big run to the MAC finals last year, and this year the recruits that I found out about come from a number of different states. We talked about Courtney Gilbert from Ontario, but there's Allie Power from Colorado. She won the State Gatorade Player of the Year award as a junior. 2 from upstate New York, Taylor Light from Brockport and Brianna Baker from Oneonta. Sheila Warren from Florida. She, as a member of the Tampa Mustangs 18U team, won a national tournament this past summer. And then Cottrell Robertson, who is from Huntington Beach, California, which, if someone's willing to come from Huntington Beach, California to UB, you're doing something well recruiting. She may not be the best player from Huntington Beach, but she's good enough to play D1, and we're good enough recruiting to get her here. Baseball signed at least 2 folks. I'm inclined to say it's the whole class because I heard about them from the baseball team themselves, but I'm not sure. Andrew White is a pitcher right from around the corner at Williamsville North. He touches the high 80s with his fastball and throws a slider about 10 miles per hour slower. He's rated as the number 9 pitcher in New York by Baseball Prep Report or something like that.com. And Connor Regan is a catcher from Walsh Jesuit in Ohio. He's rated 21st in Ohio. He hit .438 in his junior season, and when he pitched, did not give up a run. Swimming and diving, this is the last one for recruits. Swimming and diving signed 3, 2 women and a gentleman, all 3 from Swim Swam News. I can't tell if Swim Swam News is just very over the top with everything, but they were very high on all 3. Julia Box and Mallory Buha are the women's signees. They're both backstrokers, and Buha can also do the butterfly. This is really valuable for UB because their best backstroker is Melissa Trail. She's a senior, and their best butterfly is Taylor Steffel. She's a senior. So while there are other on the team that can do the strokes, these 2, it looks like they're coming in and will immediately compete for number 1 or 2 on the team. On the men's side, I only know of one recruit. His name is Mason Miller. He's out of Ohio. Swim Swam News called this a game-changing recruit for UB. They're very over the top. I can't tell if it's justified or not. He is right now only 16. He turned 17 in a week, and he's a high school senior, so he's going to come into UB very young. And I wish I had more notes on him, but that's that for swimming and diving. That's it for all the recruiting. One other thing on swimming and diving is we didn't really talk about them this week, but they're off to a great start. They're off this week. Well, to get to this week in a bowl in a moment. But we really definitely, John put this in our notes, and should I steal your thunder, John, or do you want to present it?
You can go ahead and do it.
Okay, I had talked for a while. So. Okay, so I had talked for a while. I wanted to hand it off to you. But women's swimming and diving has won all but one freestyle race in their last 3 events, last 3 meets combined. I talked about that last weekend. They're off to a hot start. One of those meets came in a win over defending MAC champion Akron, which is a big deal. Megan Burns, a freshman, won the most recent MAC Swimmer of the Week award for her performance in UB's meet against McMaster, I believe. It was that recent, might have been the week before, for her performance against Army and Michigan State. But against McMaster, she won the 50 free and the 100 free. Against Michigan State and Army, she won the 50 free and the 100 free. She has not lost the 50 free style race yet this season, undefeated in 5 tries. and she's 4 of 5 in the 100 free, having only lost in the technically a scrimmage because Cornell's not allowed to compete that early in the year, but the dual meet against Cornell, she lost the 100 free by about half a second. That's her only loss on the season. So that's a big highlight. We'll definitely talk more about swimming and diving next week after this week. We'll talk about them next week because they compete this weekend. John, do you want to do this week in bowl? I know that wrestling's one of them, so you can talk about them. It's a relatively light week for UB.
Yeah, I mean, compared to the past few weeks, there isn't too much going on. Starting Friday, swimming and diving will be at Cleveland State, and as you mentioned earlier, volleyball will kick off the MAC tournament action against Western Michigan. And Saturday, swimming and diving will also be at Cleveland State. And then Sunday they'll close out at Cleveland State. It's the Cleveland State Invitational. And then Sunday, wrestling will be at the New York State College Championships, which features any number of teams from New York, all the way from community colleges through UB, Army, Columbia. Let's see, any other big ones. Brockport, which we've already seen a few from them, and Army. I believe so, yes. Oneonta, Cortland. So there's going to be it's going to be a very good competition. It'll be a good barometer to see where UB is compared to everyone else in the state, especially Columbia. We'll be seeing them during the season a few times. They're a very strong wrestling team, as is Army. I think the Bulls can, if they put on a similar performance as they did to the Oklahoma Brockport Invitation, I think they can come out with a solid finish and hopefully walk away with a couple of championships as well.
Cool, thanks, John. So that's this week in bowl. It's another light weekend. Just 3 teams going on, in addition to the basketball teams, which we cover in other capacities. But next week we'll definitely talk about swimming and diving. They were off this weekend, so we'll have a lot of new stuff to talk about. We'll definitely be talking about wrestling. This will be a nice, like John said, a nice barometer. And if volleyball goes on a run, they won't be done by the time we talk next week, because the MAC championship isn't until Monday. But that would be a big surprise. And if we are talking about that next weekend, that will be the highlight of the show. It is now 11:29. We've really paced ourselves well, I have to say. That's it.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed it. This is, I believe, the 6th edition of the Weekend Roundup. The next couple of weeks are going to be a little bit lighter, both as exam time hits and now the fall sports have really finished winding down. So we'll be lighter for a bit, but keep watching. We'll still be talking about wrestling and swimming. Come January, track starts early. Tennis starts early. Baseball and softball start in late February, so it won't be long until we're talking about a lot again. For John, who's new to the show and a welcome addition, talking wrestling with us, which is one of our biggest sports in the winter. And for myself and for all the other guys at UB Bull Run, thanks for watching. Maybe you're watching this tomorrow, not live, and thanks for that too. Have a good week.